What's happening, everyone? James Lynch here, Fanatics View Hockey Show. So happy to have one of my really good friends and someone, I know a lot of people in the hockey industry, but very few know as much about the Ottawa Senators as my good friend here, Andrew Sztein, who contributes to the Hockey News. Andrew, thanks for doing this, man. Now, we've been talking about doing this for a while, and I felt like the timing couldn't be better doing it here today.
Absolutely. Off season. I mean, we've got all the time in the world right now.
Yeah.
So no, it's great to be here. I've been jonesing to join you on the show for a long time.
Yeah, for sure. And we've known each other for, forever. We've known each other since university, but you've always been covering the Sens and talking about the Sens for a while. We'll get to all that in a second, but what we always do here on the show, a couple things. First off, if you guys have any questions, post them in the chat. We will get to them. They can be Ottawa Senators related or not. It doesn't matter. And the thing we always do on here, we got to plug what is on the channel right now in Fanatics View. My guy Taylor putting up some really good content on here. If you look here, we got the Alexander Carrier media call. We've got Nate Schmidt joining the Florida Panthers. That was a good signing for them. League minimum on that one. All the Nashville Predators stuff, and then all the stuff from Utah, New Jersey. So like I tell you guys, make sure you subscribe to the channel here because we have all the teams putting up different pregame content, in this case free agency content, so make sure you're subscribed. My guy Taylor putting up stuff here every day, and we do the show every Wednesday. But yeah, happy to have a guest on. Like I said, you and I have been talking about doing this for a while, and it's finally here. First and foremost, let's go look at some of the moves that the Sens have made. Some key additions. Obviously, we'll go over David Perron, Mandio, Noah Gregor, Nick Jensen, Linus, Ullmark. Ullmark probably being the biggest one, and then some departures. I'm just looking at the list here. Matthew Joseph, Kulabak. Who else? Chikrin, obviously, Brandstrom, Korpisalo. What have you made first on the moves that the Sens have made? Have you been satisfied as someone who follows the team?
In general, yes. Now it depends, right? Like a lot of online discourse is always like, well, you traded Chikrin for a second pair right-hand defenseman and a pick. Like, what are you doing? Chikrin's a top 30 guy, right? But I think the moves that they've made have really created more of a unit. Right. This franchise in the past has really had a lot of problems with big name chasing. Right. So you go and you trade a 7th overall for DeBrincat. You trade a 14th overall for Chikrin. You trade what ends up being a 4th overall for Matt Duchene. Right. And that has clearly not worked. Right. So what they're doing now is creating an environment where you've added these players in that are a fit for where you have a hole in the roster. And I think Nick Jensen really fills that in that particular case. Is you needed a second pair right shot defenseman to play with Chabot, maybe to play with Sanderson, depending on where you put Zub. And that just is a fit, right? When Chikrin was here, it was you had Sanderson, Chabot, Chikrin, and you had an embarrassment of riches on the left side, but you had a desert on the right. You were playing Travis Hamonic in top 4 minutes. You were forcing Eric Brandstrom to be on the right side. You were forcing Chikrin to play on the right side. And in today's NHL, I don't think you can have the wrong shot on the wrong side anymore. It's just too key to clear that puck out effectively. And if you're shooting on the wrong side, you're backhanding it out. That's how the forwards are going to stop it right at the blue line, and then you're caught chasing in your own end. So overall, yeah, sir, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, this almost sounds like what the Canucks had to sort of make a decision with Nikita Zadorov, where you have 2 other players higher up in the food chain, and it's like, are we going to pay a guy more to play be our third pair defenseman as opposed to someone because basically Carson Soucy is the reason that Nikita Zadorov's not in Vancouver anymore. He was making less money, he was more impactful, he was always going to be the number 2 guy on the left side, and so that's why the Canucks didn't offer to bring him back. I think they wanted to, but you're not going to pay a guy $5 million to play as your third pairing defenseman. So yeah. I can certainly understand why Chikrin was expendable. And we should mention as well that obviously, you guys have new management now. So the Chikrin trade, when you guys acquired him, was I believe that was Dorian, right? Back when, yeah. So I mean, again, it's just and it's much like the Canucks have had to do with cleaning up Jim Benning's mess. I mean, it's really going through and trying to make the right decisions and all that too. So yeah, I guess a lot of it I'm assuming was financial. I did hear some rumblings. I think we had talked about this too. That the fans had kind of turned on Chikrin, or Chikrin wasn't happy. Like, can you maybe shine some light on that? Because I know there was you guys had just got Chikrin, but then it seemed like it just wasn't working out because he's from Ottawa, right?
His family's from Ottawa, but I believe he did most of his growing up in Florida.
Oh, okay, gotcha. Okay.
From Chikrin's point of view, I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that he's been in the league like 7 years now, I think, and he's never even come close to sniffing the playoffs, right? So the guy wants to be in a competitive environment. I don't think he was put in a good position to succeed in Ottawa, and he couldn't be put in a good position to succeed in Ottawa. He was a -30 last year, right? So something was not right. Now, both Chychrun and Korpisalo on their way out started talking about how it was a very hard year because of the distraction with the ownership change, with the Shane Pinto suspension, with the first round pick fining, with Pierre Dorion getting fired, with DJ Smith getting fired. It was a season of a lot of change, which should have been taken care of in the offseason last year, but the sale didn't complete until the end of September. So Michael Landauer and company couldn't just make wholesale changes when the preseason had already started, right? And then things kind of fell apart, right? So from one point of view, I can understand, like, okay, things are tough. There's a lot of distractions going on, things like that. And another part of me is like, well, if you get this distracted and your play falls off a cliff this bad because of ownership stuff, like, should that be seeping into the locker room? And is that somebody you want on your team as one of your leaders? Like Chychrun was wearing an A from time to time too last year. And I think you want from your leadership somebody who's going to tune out that kind of noise and that sort of thing. The other thing you got to keep in mind with Chychrun as well is it's not just cap money in, cap money out. He's an unrestricted free agent in 1 year.
That's true.
What's he going to get paid this time next year, right? 7-8 million easy, right? Like the guy puts up 40-50 points every year on the back end. People will kind of ignore the -30 this year and things like that. So it's not just cap space for this coming season. It's, can you afford to keep him with a player that doesn't really seem to fit? Ottawa has this thing with, we love our hometown folks. And we really want, like, the hometown guys got to succeed. And it worked with Giroux, right? Yeah. But that doesn't always mean it's going to work with everyone, right? You and I both know Ottawa is the kind of place where you grow up and then you leave. You know, like, it's unless you want to work for the government.
I love Ottawa, though. I do. I love visiting, by the way. I should mention that. It is a great place to visit. I have fond memories of Ottawa, obviously.
Same here. And it's a wonderful place to grow up, have a childhood, raise a family, right? But if you're an NHL player, you're used to bright lights and things like that. It's not New York. It's not Toronto. It's not even Vancouver, right? It's and that's just not a fit for everyone, right? And something the Senators, I think, this year with the new ownership are starting to acknowledge that we're going to try and bring in players who fit this environment, this paradigm, things like that. And I think that's what they've done with Nick Jensen, David Perron, guys like that.
Now, a lot of people were disappointed in the return, but is it one of those things where you just want to get him out of there to not make it a distraction? Because you just mentioned the inevitable. He's a UFA. It obviously wasn't going to be a long-term fit. I know fans are quick to criticize, but I think what they don't realize is, like, you got to just take care of this before it happens. It reminds me of the situation last year in Vancouver with Tanner Pearson, which ended up working out great for the Canucks. They get rid of that contract. They get Casey DeSmith as a backup, who, if you remember the backups for the Canucks the last couple of years, they've all been disasters. Braden Holtby, who was the other one? Jan Halak. Like, it was just, they were all bad. And DeSmith actually played well. I know he struggled a little bit, especially in that Minnesota game, which I'll never forget, where Minnesota scored like 7 goals in the third period. But outside of that, he was very reliable. And I think the Canucks will miss him next year as a backup. But it was one of those things where Pearson, there was this whole issue with how the Canucks handled his hand surgery. The doctor butchered it apparently, and there's all these issues. So it's like, you don't want those distractions. So I kind of understand it from that standpoint. But on a more positive note, I want to talk about this Linus Ullmark trade. Man, that was one of the best trades, I think, in the entire offseason. I messaged you right away. I was like, how did you get him for like nothing? What was your initial reaction? Because I think league wide, everyone thought that was a home run for the Ottawa Senators.
Again, in a vacuum, it's a great trade, right? Now, if you want to put out the negative ones, he's not re-signed after this year. So he's technically only here for a year. Maybe everything blows up and it goes south at the trade deadline. And then all of a sudden, everybody thought Alex DeBrincat was an awesome trade, right? Like, oh man, they got a 40 goal scorer for a first round pick and some late round picks. And how could this possibly not work? Now, this is the negative. I haven't seen the playoffs in 7 years. Fan perspective talking. Right now, that was an amazing deal. Not only did you get when they acquired him, he was the reigning Vezina winner. Not anymore, but what a difference a week makes, right? So reigning Vezina winner, you got him for a late first round pick, a fourth liner who is really good on faceoffs in Mark Kastelik, but doesn't use his body effectively. You're always left wanting more. Like, why aren't you slamming that guy in the corner? Like, there's a really good highlight reel on YouTube where he just lets his check go right past him, and Daniel Alfredsson's giving it to him on the bench. Now, if somebody's going to awaken that part of him, it's going to be the Bruins, right? And then you get rid of Jonas Korpisalo, who was statistically the worst starting goalie in the league last year. Yeah. And you get a reigning Vezina winner for that package. Like, how do you not love that? Now, Ottawa retained $1 million on Jonas Korpisalo, but still $3 million off the cap. Like, you're only adding $2 million in cap space at that point, and you're bringing in Linus Ullmark. But this goes back, I think, to the Chychrun thing, that the league has changed. You're not making hockey trades anymore, right? What you're really doing is there's no space for this guy here. So we got to trade him for pennies on the dollar, because even a meager return, like on Boston's end with Ullmark or Ottawa's end with Chychrun, is you got to get him out of here for what you can get, right? In a cap world, you can't just have a $5 million goalie playing 20 games, right? And Swayman took over. So I think it's an awesome fit. I don't know if you've seen the YouTube videos of like Ullmark joining the team or some podcasts.
I haven't. Enlighten me. This is why I wanted to get you on here. Yeah. Like, I just got to let you guys know that like the way I follow the Canucks is the exact same way that Andrew follows the Ottawa Senators. So him and I can talk for hours, because I'm fascinated. Anyone that like follows their team so well and you get those little details, to me, it's very interesting to hear that. So you tell me what's going on.
Well, it sounds like the kind of guy you and I could have a beer with. He named his kid Harry after Harry Potter. He listed his side hobbies as Dungeons and Dragons and computer games. Big metalhead, right? Like, really relatable dude, right? And then there was a YouTube video of him meeting all the team people, like Steve Stais and the training staff, medical staff, a couple of his teammates and stuff like that. It just seems like a super down-to-earth, easygoing, family-oriented dude, which could be a really good fit for Ottawa. And one thing I also found really interesting is Ottawa's defensive metrics were not as bad as their true defensive numbers last year. In fact, they were better than Boston in a lot of categories, like high danger chances. High danger chances, Boston was better. But in terms of medium and low danger, Ottawa actually played better defense. And hey, you were at that game with me in Vancouver where Ottawa was down 5-0 in the first period. And some of those goals were... let's charitably call them weak. And I think having a steadying influence in the back end is the biggest difference this year compared to next. Now, hopefully he stays healthy. Hopefully there's a defensive system in place in front of him where he can shine. There's a better fit in the top four with Nick Jensen in for Chychrun. So you got that more well-balanced top four. And you got a goalie who's just going to make that save. It's not going to go in under his armpit from the far side of the faceoff circle and things like that. And like, that'll just deflate a team, right? And when you've got a young team like Ottawa too, knowing that you have that Vezina caliber goaltending behind you doesn't just mean you'll take more chances. You're just going to play with a little more confidence, right? You're going to skate that little bit harder to pinch on the opposite end, because Ullmark has got you covered, or you
take more risks. I mean, you don't have to worry about it, right? Like it's when you have someone that you're confident in, the whole team's going to play better. You feel it,
So he seems like just a really good personality for the market, and he's automatically one of the oldest players on the team at 30 years old. So it's just that steadying influence, somebody who can help in the locker room settle down the guys if they're down one goal going into the third period. Last year, it was just Giroux. Right. And maybe a little Travis Hamonic, but it's hard to listen to a guy who's your seventh defenseman, who's like, just doesn't really have it anymore. He's at the very twilight of his career. So when you've got a guy who's playing at an elite level, like a Giroux, like an Ullmark, hopefully like a Nick Jensen, David Perron, right? Guys who have cup rings, or hardware to back it up. It's a lot easier to listen to those guys. And hey, we're in this game. Calm down, play your role, what have you. And I think almost more than his goaltending ability, that stabilizing factor is the best part of this trade.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Speaking of Hamonic, we have a question here from Ryan. He says, what are the expectations on Hamonic's performance in the coming year, former Canuck? Yeah. So you kind of mentioned it there. I mean, he's not what he used to be. Not even maybe a good veteran presence, because he's not a guy that's really even playing that well. Is he just sort of like, a depth guy that you can rely on? Or how do you sort of look at Hamonic and what he means to the team at this point?
I think the expectation in the market this year was that he'd be bought out. Pierre Dorion gave him a 2-year, $1.1 million deal with a total no movement clause, which means you can't even bury him in the minor. Yeah. You can't even bury the guy in the minors. So he is on the roster as the seventh guy. Now, if he has to fill in for some injuries, he's playing 40 games and he's getting 8 to 10 minutes a night in the right scenarios, like you're using him mostly on the penalty kill, you're using him against the other team's fourth line. You don't want him to go up against Elias Pettersson or JT Miller or Austin Matthews or guys like he's going to get lit up. He doesn't have the foot speed anymore, but he still, I feel, plays the game the right way, right? He'll finish his check in the corner. He'll block shots. He's a little too eager to take like those big point shot bombs that served him so well in places like Vancouver, more in Calgary and in the Islanders system when he had the more accurate shot. He was a little better at picking time and space to do that. I don't think he's going to hurt your team as your seventh guy, especially for one more year. But if he's getting a regular turn in the top four, you've got problems at that point. But I could see like one thing I know about Travis Hamonic is he's really fallen in love with the Ottawa market based on what I've said earlier. His kids love the schools there. I think he's kind of a religious dude. So he's found like a church that he feels like is a good fit for his family. I could totally see him joining the office after this season, sticking around in that market. And you can provide leadership that way too, right? Like, look at what Ottawa's doing with Jacques Martin, senior advisor to the coaching staff, instilling new, better habits in the players in the second half of last season. Voices like that are always key. And Ottawa's had a big problem with an understaffed office before the Andlauer took over. And that would be a really good voice for it. So I don't see any problem with it. Now, if you're 2-3 injuries in, get somebody else, like bring somebody else in and sign them. How did you feel about Hamonic in Vancouver?
So it was mixed. Like, so if you remember, we got him that season that we lost Tanev, and like it was the season that Benning, like it was basically Benning's nail in the coffin. We did there was all these dumb moves we did. We did the OEL trade. We did the Hamonic signing. We lost Tanev. We lost Markstrom for nothing. That was the bubble year. And they chose to sign Virtanen over Tyler Toffoli, which was like, and which they ended up buying out Virtanen like shortly after that. They signed Brandon Holtby, which didn't work out. So Hamonic, I think, was seen as like a low risk option for a guy that, you know, could play like a top 4 role. And I think he did okay. You remember there was that whole issue. I don't know if you remember this, but there was a whole issue with him playing at the start of the season because he wouldn't get the vax. Do you remember that?
Yeah.
Like he like, and there was like this big mystery and Benning wasn't saying anything and he wasn't saying anything. And they're like, well, he's not injured, but like he can't play. And like, it was this big story and it was such a PR disaster. And it was just one of the many things that the previous management were just so incompetent about. Yeah. And so I think like the thing with Hamonic was, I think we were fine with them. I just think the issue was that they needed to clear cap space. And that's what basically Alvin and Rutherford did when they came in. And if I remember correctly, they traded him to Ottawa to get a pick and they used that pick to get Travis Dermott from the Leafs, which didn't end up working out. But it was sort of the idea was, hey, we want to take a guy who's got some upside and that's younger. And sort of go from there. So I think it was sort of mixed reviews with Hamonic.
When it came to the vax thing, I think his agent came out once he had already been traded to Ottawa saying that it was actually a medical issue. He could not get the vax. And that he came out and it's like, he absolutely would have done it. He wanted to be there for his team, right? But it was, no one was really listening as like, you either got the vax or you didn't. But let's stick to the hockey side of things. Let's not jump down that rabbit hole. But overall, like as a dressing room presence, I think Hamonic has been a positive. On the ice, how mad can you really get about a fourth defenseman, right? Like, or sorry, a seventh defenseman is like, if that's where, like, you've got bigger problems if that's the difference between success and failure with your team, if you ask me.
So let's talk about success. Do you think the Sens make the playoffs? Because I think there's a sentiment around the league that now that they got the goaltender, and you correct me if I'm wrong here, but I feel like Ullmark, they haven't had a good goaltender since maybe Ray Emery, maybe Hasek. Like, is it too far to go back to there? I know you had like your Andrew Hammonds and all these other goalies in between there, but like for you, is Ullmark the difference between not making the playoffs and making the playoffs in your opinion?
I think if you take Ottawa's analytics, like underlying stats from last year, and you apply 905 goaltending to that, they're right where Detroit was in that like 5-point window in or out, like right down to the last week. Ottawa's team save percentage last year was sub 890. You don't win with that. You just don't. Another issue with last year was DJ Smith was holding on by his fingernails to his job. So he's not holding underperforming young stars. Like Tim Stützle was not the Tim Stützle of the year before. But DJ Smith wants to hold on to his job, so he's going to play Tim Stützle above 20 minutes a night. Even if, like, you know, he's a 21-year-old player who's had a lot of success early and getting a little too frustrated. Maybe you got to sit him down for a little bit, observe, things like that. With Travis Green in now, you talked me off the cliff on this one because I looked at his record and I'm like, what are they doing? Right.
Well, sorry to interrupt you there. I want to show you the team he had before he got fired. And I was, so for those who don't know, and I think I told you this too, I was at the game he got that he got fired. I remember it was Thanksgiving. That was when they lost to the Penguins. They got completely destroyed in that game. I think it was Penguins or Buffalo. I can't remember. It was one team, but it was just, if you look at the lineup that they had, I'll show you right now. Let's see if I can bring it up here. Where is it? So it says I'm sharing my screen, but hold on one second. Let's go share the screen here. There we go. This was the lineup that the Canucks had, okay? So Miller Pettersson hadn't really taken steps forward. Bo Horvat was okay. But then you got guys like Alex Chiasson, I remember we got from Edmonton to like basically sit in front of the net and try and
former Senator.
Brad Hunt on defense. Juho Lammikko, who was in that trade when we got rid of Olli Levy. Matthew Highmore. Jason Dickinson, which was a Benning signing that didn't work out. Hamonic. Kyle Burrows. Brad Richardson was there for a cup of coffee. Justin Downing. Sheldon Dries. Tucker Pullman. Travis Dermott. Nick Patan, who actually ended up doing quite well for Washington. And it was just like you can't win. Madison Bowie. Like, this
was that Thatcher Demko's first season too?
Yes, it was. Yeah.
Right. So
after Markstrom,
he's not ready to be a starter either. And did I see right? 64 games played that year too?
Yeah. You're correct. Yeah. And so look at this, 17 games for Halak. I'm actually surprised that Halak played that many games.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
So and looking at it a little more, like, to kind of get back to that point as well, is with what coach was Toe Blake or Scotty Bowman like right out of his first gig? Like, nobody.
Yeah, that's
right.
True.
Paul Maurice, took him 20 years to win a Stanley Cup. Right, like he had a very
you know this Rick Bowness. Look at Rick Bowness after, like, he coached the Senators in their early inception, right?
First season, 10 wins that year, 1 road win, like week, right? Look at Jared Bednar, right? The worst team in the cap era was the Colorado Avalanche, 48 points, and they were a Cup winner 6-7 years later, right? Yeah. So you got to give these guys a chance. You got to give them a chance to learn from previous mistakes and how to manage adversity and things like that. And that's not something that you come into a NHL head coaching job fully formed. So I'm on the let's see how he does thing. I like that DJ Smith was very much I'm the player's friend and I'm here to help you transition into the NHL, and everything's okay. It's okay that you gave away the puck there. It's okay. Yeah, let's party, guys. You know, hey, we won tonight. Everything's great, right? And getting too high, getting too low. Travis Green is notorious for running a very hard training camp. So players who are coming in looking for a country club atmosphere, I think, are going to be in for a bit of a surprise this year. That's a positive in the can they make the playoffs this year? I think they're going to be right there.
Yeah, that's what I think too.
You got to think the Atlantic Division. You got Toronto, you got Tampa, you got the defending Cup champs in Florida, and you've got Boston. I thought Boston was going to fall out this year, right? Yeah. Like Charlie Coyle's your number one center. Like no Krejci, no Bergeron, and still, like, I don't know how many points they had, above 100, right? Yeah, You think Tampa Bay, maybe they start dropping off a little bit? Do they fall all the way out of the playoffs, right? Like, you lost Stamkos, but you got Gensel, right? Like, can you really count on them not being in there? Toronto, you know, it like pains me to say it, but like, if you've got Austin Matthews and you've got William Nylander and you've got Morgan Riley, like, that looks like a playoff team to me too, right? So what it really looks like is Ottawa is going to be in tight competition all year with Boston, Detroit, and probably the Washington Capitals for that last wild card spot, right? Because if you're already counting in Toronto, Boston, Tampa, and Florida, that's already the 3 Atlantic Division spots plus a wild card. So now, with that said, I think Detroit took a step back this year.
Big time. I'm so surprised. I don't know how you feel about this. And we all love Steve Yzerman, obviously born in BC, raised in Ottawa. So there's that connection. But like, you know, this is a guy that was considered like the architect of Tampa Bay. And I don't know what he's doing in Detroit. If you actually look on The Athletic,
Yeah.
I had the article up here.
The guy signed like 6 goalies. Like what? I don't understand. Are you just going to like release these guys after training camp and just take your pick of the litter? Like, how do you even get these guys properly warmed up?
Yeah. And then like you're signing Cam Talbot, like, you know, and Tarasenko, who I see you have the jersey back there. Didn't last too long. Yeah, I know.
He's a cup winner.
Yeah, exactly.
I had to put that one out there.
No, for sure. No, I agree. Like, I think Detroit is one of the most confusing teams in the offseason. Like, I don't like any of their moves. And they lost some key guys. You mentioned Boston. I still maintain this. I think we even talked about this in private. I don't think Lindholm's a number one center. Like, we had him in Vancouver, and you know, I don't know if I think people know this, maybe not the people outside of Vancouver. They tried to actually flip him at the deadline because it wasn't working out. Now, he played very well in the playoffs. I'll give him that. He was definitely a key contributor there, but I don't think he is what he is. Like, I think those years he had in Calgary was a lot due to Gaudreau, and maybe he'll be able to replicate that with some of the guys in Boston, but I don't know, man, 7 years and like, it's just, yeah, that's like, again, similar situation. If Lindholm was in Vancouver, he would be a third line center. You can't pay a third line center $7 million plus or whatever it was going to be. So,
well, on top of that, you're paying him $7 million. What, I think 6 years.
Yeah,
they signed Zadorov $5 million for 6 years.
Yeah,
and you just took on Jonas Korpisalo for $3 million a year for 4 years. Like, that already is $16 million in cap space on these 3 players. Korpisalo is going to be a nice backup to Swayman, right? He's not going to be counted to carry the mail, stuff like that. But those are weird moves for, and they didn't get younger either. Like, Zadorov and Lindholm and Korpisalo are all 30.
Yeah.
Right. Like, so
that was the other risk with Zadorov too. Like, I mentioned this many times in the show.
Physical player, and he's older, right? Like, so.
Yeah, and that style, it's like Tanev in Toronto. Like, Tanev will probably get 3 to 4 years good out of that deal, but he's going to break down. It's inevitable, like just the way he plays, and he's a good locker room guy. Like, I like the move they did for Tanev, but you have to think that's not really a 6-year plan. That's more like 3-4 year.
Yeah.
You know?
So to kind of go back to what you said, Ottawa's been out of the playoffs for 7 years. In my recent article,
been that long, Jesus,
7 years.
Yeah.
But in my recent article for the Hockey News, I typed in, I looked up kind of their playoff history, and from 1997 to 2017, they only missed the playoffs 4 times.
Yeah.
Right. So Ottawa has this reputation as kind of mediocre poverty franchise and things like that. They were the poster boys for like sustained success for 20 years. Now you got these 7 years, and you got Mark Stone and Erik Karlsson and all these guys just walking out the door. So it's instilled kind of a losing culture in this franchise that it's really hard to get out of that tailspin. You can relate as a Vancouver fan in the 2010s, right? Like, it's just kind of like, well, this is my team now, and this isn't somewhere where people want to play, and you've got negative ownership.
People don't want to play there. Yeah, we had that for sure. And that's still for a long time, and even up until recently. I mean, that was another thing too with the Canucks, is that the ownership's meddling, like, you know, the owner's meddling, I should say, and like people don't want to play here and all this. And now it's the opposite. Now you're hearing guys taking, like, look at Dakota Joshua. Like, that right now looks like a great contract, because looking at similar comparables in the free agent market, look how much more they got paid. He could have probably got $5-6 million on the open market. We got him under $5. I mean, that's amazing. So
absolutely. So with all that said, if you're putting a gun to my head, is Ottawa making the playoffs this year? Yes, in the last wild card spot. I love and they are going to have to really show, this is where you're going to depend on Giroux, Perron, Ullmark specifically. We are 1 point out, or we're 1 point up on 3 teams that are chasing us. This is how you play in a meaningful game. And if they can provide that leadership, I like their chances. With that said, if they miss out on the playoffs Detroit style by 1 point, 2 points, I think that's still a success this season.
Oh, big time.
With that, you can convince Giroux to stay. You can convince Brady Tkachuk that this is a team that's going up, right?
Yeah.
Another season where they're out of the playoffs in December, these BS Brady Tkachuk trade rumors might start
having some legs.
And like you see these Brady Tkachuk trade rumors, like Toronto's going to get Brady Tkachuk for Liljegren and Nick Robertson, and like, Clickbait,
that is
dude.
such a typical
Clickbait.
thing that Leafs fans would say.
Like,
for sure.
okay, like no.
Plus, wouldn't the idea be that he wanted to do it? His brother didn't go to the U.S. If it was somewhere, he's not going to go to Toronto from Ottawa. You know what I mean? Like, come on.
He still has 4 years left on his contract, so it's not really up to him anyway.
Yeah.
right?
So we actually have a question about how important is the future for Tkachuk. Like, I agree. And here I'll equate something else that I think is kind of similar to what Vancouver went through last year. And I know I keep talking about the Canucks. Like, I even got the shirt on today, just coincidentally. But a big part of the Canucks' success this past year, aside from buying into Rick Tockett's system, was you had younger players take that next step. Look at Quinn Hughes, Norris Trophy winner. That contract looks like it actually was. If you look at The Athletic, they had an article out yesterday. One of the best contracts in the league was Quinn Hughes's. You had guys take that next step. I think Ottawa's in a similar position. You have guys, like you mentioned Stoltze and some of these other guys that I think can take that next step next year with a new coach. You got the goaltending, you got the confidence. That's something, too, that I'd be willing to bet on as far as why I think Ottawa will make it. And I think Brady Tkachuk's another one, too. And maybe he sees that and he wants to stay. Another thing I'll kind of equate with the Canucks as well. Look at a guy like Philip Hronek. A lot of people, there's all these rumors, he's going to want $8 million and he wants out and he doesn't like the media. But he specifically said, I like playing in this locker room. I like these guys. We have something good here. We have a young core that's going to move ahead. I see similar situations there with Ottawa. So that's why if I'm a betting man right now, I think Brady does stay because he'll start to see success with the team this year.
Yeah. And also, like, Brady's, I think, 24 years old. He's going to be a dad in September. He just got married. He's not his brother, right? Like, they play similarly on the ice, but in terms of like personality, like, Brady does seem like a good fit for the Ottawa market. Did they give him the captaincy too early? Probably. Brady and Tim Stützle in particular have, I don't want to call it an immaturity problem, but it's just a lack of like high-end leadership experience. Let's call it that. Where when they get high, they get very high. But when they get low, it reflects in their play and in their body language. And that is something that I think Travis Green can help them out with. Right. Is when Tim Stützle in particular, right? When he's high, like waving his arms up and around, like, you see videos of him on the bench where he literally looks like he's crying, right? Like, what galvanizes an opponent more than seeing your opponent
breaking someone mentally,
breaking somebody like that? And then Brady's the same thing. I don't know if you saw those Detroit highlights from a season and a half ago.
I know exactly what you're referring to.
Like, who wants it? Who wants it? Right. And it's like, okay, dude, like, you're giving them ammunition. Right, you're giving them motivation. And
Travis Green went through this with JT Miller. You remember the talk the year before with JT Miller was he can't play defense, right? And like that was a big thing. And there was that. Do you remember that exchange between him and Luke Schenn? And it became a huge thing where like him and Luke Schenn were like arguing on the bench and all this stuff, and it was like a big thing, right? I think that was during Boudreau, but still, like Green's dealt with like hotheads before. And look, a guy like Rick Tocchet comes in, Miller's playing his best hockey, and he's playing defense now. So it can be turned around. Is kind of what I'm getting at. The maturity.
Yeah, but to answer B. Kerslake's question, I think this is a vital season for Brady Tkachuk in Ottawa. Once you're down to 3 years left on the contract, right? If this is another season where they're out of the playoffs by 15 points before Christmas and just the vibes are terrible and all that, now as management, you need to start looking at, well, we've got a superstar unicorn player who plays with the energy of a fourth liner, who hits hard, gets 30 goals every year, is in that 70 to 85 point range, has leadership ability, comes with name brand recognition, right? What's the return going to be for him if he has 3 years left on his deal versus, we're going to wait a little longer, he's going to pout for a year, and then all of a sudden you trade him with 2 years left and things like that. So you've got to start looking at that if this season goes down the tubes to that extent. I think Brady will be happy to stay if it's a near miss in that particular case. Side note, I wanted to shout out my buddy Ryan. Thanks for the question, homie.
Also, this is a good question because we sort of just focused on Ottawa here, but any early Stanley Cup picks for 2025? Oilers are the current betting favorites at plus 850. Plus 850 seems a lot for them being the would be a bit lower. Maybe I'm wrong on that. And then followed by the Panthers. So listen, the Oilers definitely got better. I mean, they got Jeff Skinner for like, nothing. Who else did they get? They got, what was the guy from Buffalo? They traded McLeod for Savoie. No, what's his name? Who's the guy they got for Ryan McLeod? I can't remember. You know what? I'm just going to look it up right here.
Savoie from Buffalo?
Yeah. Who did they get in? Because remember they made that trade and it actually worked out well for them. So they got they got Jeff Skinner, they got Arvidsson, and they got what was the other guy? Who did they trade? Here, I'm just gonna look it up right now. I don't know why I'm forgetting. From Buffalo, who's the guy they got from Buffalo?
Matthew Sawa.
Oh, I was right about that. Okay.
Big prospect, hasn't made much of a dent in the NHL yet.
Right. Yeah. So they're kind of betting on that. Here's something to keep in mind with the Oilers.
That's what Edmonton needs, right? You need prospects. Like your roster's full.
Yeah.
Right.
Something to keep an eye on right now, and this is something that I haven't talked about on the show yet, and we'll get to our cup picks in a second. I won't forget about that. They have two guys they have to sign that are restricted free agents, Broberg and Holloway. And they don't have any cap space. Like they're going to have to make a trade or something. And, we don't see offer sheets very often in the NHL. But if I'm Calgary, why wouldn't you offer sheet either of those guys? Because Edmonton's screwed. Would you give up a second round pick for Holloway Holloway's a first round pick. Would you not give up a second round pick for him? Because that's a compensation. Or Broberg, they're both first round picks. If I'm a team, I take advantage of that because Edmonton's in a bit of a mess that way, cap-wise. What do you think of that situation?
Well, Edmonton just traded 2 prospects to Ottawa for 1 prospect. So they've already opened up some contract slots that way, including a former first-round pick in, I don't know, Xavier. I'm not going to pronounce his name properly, but Bougeneau, but whatever his name is. So there's still room for cleanup there. One thing I thought was really interesting, I watched the hockey guy on YouTube.
Oh, of course. He was one of my favorites, yeah.
And he was talking about how Carolina all of a sudden just opened up $8 million in cap space, right? Why wouldn't they offer sheet some of these guys from Edmonton, right? Yeah. He was talking about why aren't they? Carolina is in a position to offer sheet Quentin Byfield right now. And then as soon as I saw that video, they signed him, right? Like LA was like, oh, we got to get Byfield. Yeah. Really good contract. Yeah. So with the when it comes to the Oilers, if they can pull a miracle, like if Ottawa can trade Jonas Korpisalo for a Vezina winner, you can find a taker for Evander Kane.
Yeah.
You can find a taker for Darnell Nurse. I will
say about Kane, though, unfortunately, he's not a good locker room guy. I think that does scare a lot of teams off because you remember he was a free agent. I know he signed with Edmonton, and I know there were some teams interested, but that's another factor. I mean, it's pretty hard to be playing with Connor McDavid and seeing some discussions on the bench. It didn't look quite good, and he was very much invisible in the playoffs. Yeah.
Darnell Nurse is like, you could trade him to a team like Chicago, who needs a little more just experience, right? They're not there to win
Chicago,
right now.
Though, they already got a kind of a big contract with Seth Jones, right? So do you want 2 of those contracts?
Well, I mean, you got a salary cap floor and a lot of cap space, right?
But wouldn't you rather use that salary for forwards? That's part of the reason they took Mikheyev on from the Canucks is they want to build some, they want to take a step forward this year for sure. So I don't know if they go that route, but yeah, you never know. I don't think they'll trade Nurse as bad. I think we'll see, but it'll be interesting. Anyways, quickly to the question itself, because we got about 5 minutes left here.
Okay.
Yeah, as far as cup favorites, I said this yesterday. I'm still going to kind of maintain it. I still think Dallas is a player in this. I think they have a better backup in Casey DeSmith and Scott Wedgwood. I think a lot of that fell on, obviously Ottinger not playing well. I think Tanev getting injured last year hurt them. Now, obviously, they didn't really replace him. They got Matt Dumba, which will help, but I still think they're a threat. My issue still with the Oilers is I do question their defense a bit, and I do question the goaltending. I know Stuart Skinner had some good games, but there were some Canucks.
He was stellar in Game 7.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah.
But you didn't see a lot of games like that from him. That's kind of what I'm getting at. So.
Totally. There was 1 or 2 games in the finals with him where I was like, oh, like you should have had that one in those first 3 games, especially, right? But I mean, goaltending is voodoo. Just asking Ottawa Senators.
Florida almost blew it with Bobrovsky. And literally, that's the only reason they ended up winning was because he was so good in certain games, and then other games he wasn't. It really did. Everything was kind of decided on him, in my opinion. So.
So to kind of go back to the question for cup picks, I like Edmonton's chances. I think their biggest competition in the West is Vancouver. Now, I could totally see a scenario where Vancouver knocks them out and then gets knocked out by Dallas or something like that. Some teams are just built to contain another team better.
Key. Like, prime example, LA, when they played Edmonton last year, they were never going to win that series because LA became such a defensive team under Hiller that you're not going to outscore Edmonton. Do you know what I mean? You're not going to outscore Connor McDavid.
Nashville had the same problem with Vancouver. The same thing.
Yeah, exactly.
Right?
Yeah, they didn't have that.
You were playing in your own end real solid, but if you're hanging on by your fingernails in the defensive zone and just blocking out the slot and you're not getting goals of your own, battle of attrition, you're not going to get there, right? Yeah. I really like the Rangers. Don't bet against Shesterkin. That guy's got future cup winner written all over him. I like, even now, with all the players Carolina's lost, like Rod Brindamore got that team playing like a unit. They're buying out Kuznetsov. They've got cap space now all of a sudden out of nowhere. The players that they gave up, like Teravainen, like Gensel was there for one run. He wasn't like kind of he's a core piece, but he hasn't been like there for years, like a Stamkos in Tampa. History has shown us that unless you're Tampa Bay, if you've gone to finals 2 years in a row, you're probably not going for a third. Florida is beat up, and they lost Brandon Montour too. So, I mean, they're still going to be a real good team. Don't get me wrong. Is this the year Toronto finally breaks out? Probably not. I mean, it's Toronto, but
like, trade that core four. Like I don't just. I think that as soon as Saros signed in Nashville, because I thought that was a perfect trade, Marner for Saros or something. Get him a goaltender. I don't know. They're still doing the shoestring goaltending in my opinion with Wall, and Stolarz is good, but is he like? Do we know he's good? We don't. They haven't had a good goaltender since Belfour, basically. Who was
20
years ago?
Like James Reimer was it was 4-1 game. And I like Edmonton. I like the Rangers. Those would probably be
agree
my
with you on the Rangers too, because I think, like you just mentioned, Florida, part of the reason they were able to win, I think last year, was they had been there the year before. I think with the Rangers, they just looked, there was a point in that series where they're like, Florida's just going to win. Like, you just knew it. I'm hoping they learned from that. They did lose a couple, like I know they lost Barclay Goudreau and a few other players, but I agree as well. The other thing you got to quickly remember about Carolina though too, they have to still figure out what's going on with Netchus, right? Because whether they're going to trade him or whatever. So some of that cap space will have to be used for him or his replacement or whatever. So keep that in mind too. Yeah.
And don't forget, Edmonton can trade Evander Kane and retain 50% too.
That's true.
Right.
Yeah.
So maybe a team like Columbus is a fit, right? Like moves like this can be made. If you want to bring up that next comment, that's something I would also agree with. New Jersey took a big step back this year. And
they've never had a goaltender since Brodeur, basically, if you think about it. Now they've got a legit, I can tell you firsthand, Jacob Markstrom's the real deal. You look at his underlying numbers, they back that up. I agree with you. That's a team that's going to be dangerous. And if Jack Hughes stays healthy, because that was another thing that hurt them last year. When he was out, they looked like a different team. So
and their top six, I think, is second only to Edmonton in the NHL. All right, like you got Hischier, you got Hughes. They've got a Hughes at every position.
They do, basically.
Yeah.
On the Bruins. I think the Bruins are great. My issue is just, again, like, I don't think Lindholm is as good as people think. I've told all my Boston friends this. I think you guys are going to love Zadorov. He's going to be like a fan favorite like Chara, and then you're not going to like Lindholm at certain points because I've seen it enough, and I know there's maybe some injuries, but he's not what he used to be. I'm telling you guys, trust me on that. So
here's something people are saying about, Ullmark in Ottawa. He's never played more than 49 games in a season. You know who else hasn't? Jeremy Swayman.
Yeah,
right. Like he's one of those goalies who's on the top of his game when he gets spelled and is a platoon goalie, and maybe he takes a bit of a step back. With that said, a lot of this is wishful thinking because I've been hoping that Ottawa is going to take Boston's spot for like at least 3 or 4 seasons now, and then they set records, like literally the most wins ever in a season. I don't like them to go 4 series deep though. Myself.
And they lost
playoffs are probably
as well. They lost Danton Heinen. Like, they did lose a couple other key players on that team. So we'll see if the replacements they got are
Jake DeBrusk is a big loss for them and a huge gain for the Canucks, if you ask me. Like, that's the kind of guy.
The fingers are crossed, Andrew, is that Pettersson's gonna. This is the solution to Pettersson, because that's been the excuse for years. He's never had a good winger. They tried Mikheyev. They tried Höglander. He hasn't had that solid winger. Now you got one. The excuses are over, and he's got to live up to that $11.6 million contract. So that's what everyone in Vancouver is holding their breath for.
Pettersson's like a Stützle, right? He's like a bit of an undersized, highly skilled forward who needs a rough and tumble guy on his line who's going to create open space for him. DeBrusk is that kind of guy, right? Giroux and Tkachuk do that for Stützle in Ottawa, and it opens them up and it gives them more confidence, right? And that's what you need from guys like Pettersson and Stützle. Is you need the big open confidence to play your game your way, and that's what guys like that do. And a reasonable contract too, sub $6 million. Like that's pretty good for a top 6 forward, if you ask me.
Completely agree. We're out of time here. One more thing I wanted to mention about Detroit that I completely forgot about. They also signed Jack Campbell. Like, what are you doing? They have Talbot and Jack Campbell. And I think they have, what's his Alex?
And Husso. And they still have Billy Husso.
I was getting
and Alex Lyon.
Yeah, Alex Lyon, yeah. So
and they acquired another dude. And they have one of the best goaltending prospects in Sebastian Casa. Like, there is not enough crease to go around with these guys.
Yeah, I just don't know what they're doing there. Andrew, this was fun. We'll definitely get you back on. You know what? I want to get you on too during the season as well, and we'll kind of talk about how the Senators are doing, because they're a team I'll be definitely keeping an eye on. Just let people know where they can get a hold of you on social media, and I know you got an article coming out soon here on the Hockey News, so plug that as well.
Yeah, so I'm writing for the Ottawa Hockey News. Thanks to shout out to Steve Warren, who's kind of brought me on the squad there, and I try to write on the Hockey News as the perspective of a Toronto-based Ottawa fan, which is bit of a rare thing to find. You can find me on Twitter at Sztein Creative, SZTEIN Creative. You can check me out on my website, steincreative.ca. My main gig is DJing in Toronto.
If you're in Toronto, hire this guy. I've seen it firsthand. One of the best in the world when it comes to DJing. So.
Next time I'm on, I'll tell you all about how I troll Toronto Maple Leafs fans in bars musically through the decks. And you can follow me on Facebook at Sztein Creative as well. And one last one, DJ Frankenstein on Instagram.
Yeah, check out his mixes.
Thank you so much for having me. This was a blast.
Dude, we're going to do this again, man. So informative. Again, if you didn't know enough about the Senators, you do now. Andrew's on the pulse of this, and this is the type of people I want to get on as guests going forward, is getting people that know the market really well and finding out things that I didn't know, like that thing about Ullmark. I didn't know that, like about him, connecting with the fans and all that. All that stuff's valuable. You can follow me on Twitter at Lynch on Sports. We do the show every Wednesday, the Fanatics View Hockey Show. Make sure you subscribe to the channel. Follow me on social media. You can see it there at Lynch on Sports. For myself, for Andrew, hope you guys have a great rest of your Wednesday, and we'll talk